Now, something else that we want to talk about is medications. There are a lot of different medications that have been shown to increase asthma symptoms. And so many of you may not be aware, but NSAIDs, that stands for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. It's drugs like ibuprofen and naproxen, okay, Celebrex, those are NSAIDs. And then drugs like beta blockers, these are medications for blood pressure, and ACE inhibitors, also medications for blood pressure. They've all been shown to increase asthma symptoms. So if you're on these medications and you're having trouble breathing, since you got on those medications, you've been having more trouble breathing, you're developing symptoms that you think might be asthma, and your heart doctor or your prescribing doctor's like, oh, let's send you to the lung doctor, stop there before you do that and have a conversation with that doctor about the potential for these beta blockers and these ACE inhibitors that are being used to lower your blood pressure to affect and impact your asthmatic symptoms. Because if you don't, you might be going to the lung doctor and the next thing they're going to put you on is an inhaler with steroids. And steroid inhalers weaken the immune system. And what have we been talking about all night? We've been talking about the immune system playing a critical part in your body's ability to protect itself from an asthma response. Now, here's what we know. It's kind of an extenuation of diet. This image is from the journal Nutrients. It's published not very long ago, 2017. But what we're looking at here, let's put that in the middle, is we're looking at, again, you can see on this side, a diet rich in plant-based fruits and vegetables. Now, that doesn't mean that, a lot of vegetarians out there would say, well, don't eat meat because it's not good for you. This study actually was examining the Mediterranean diet, which includes meat. But what they found is that the nutrients, the antioxidant nutrients from fruits and vegetables and some of the other things, that's what this little green triangle here is. You see? So you see up here in this diagram, that little green triangle, this feeds your healthy bacteria in such a way that you get metabolites called short-chain fatty acids. These short-chain fatty acids, so when you feed your good bacteria and you produce short-chain fatty acids, these help seal the gut, okay? So this lining right here, we want that lining to be sealed. We don't want it to be leaking, right? We don't want things to penetrate through, because if things penetrate through, you've all heard that term, leaky gut. This is leaky barrier. Well, fruits and vegetables provide certain types of nutrients that help your bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids. Short-chain fatty acids do what? They fuel your cells of your intestines to be strong and to replicate and turn over. So it helps keep that gut nice and tightly sealed so that, again, you don't have a bunch of bacterial byproducts or other chemicals leaking into the bloodstream, okay? Whereas on this side of the equation, we got this Western diet, okay, and so we got these chemicals and all these processed dyes and sugar and everything else that are coming in, okay, so these things here, and then you can see that what they do is they affect the bacteria to produce inflammatory mediators. So you can see here in this diagram, you can see interleukin-6, that IL-6, that's a chemical that causes inflammation. TNF-alpha, that's tumor necrosis factor alpha. It's another chemical that causes inflammation. Interleukin-8. So what happens is when you eat that Western diet, it promotes bacteria to promote the production of these chemicals. You remember, your bacteria is trying to help you, defend you from the garbage that you're eating, and in so doing, you're producing immune responses to try to neutralize those terrible chemicals. Well, what happens in the airways? The same thing. So whereas this is the bloodstream and this is the gut on either side, these are the barriers in your lung. And a lot of people don't realize that your airways, okay, your airways have the same kind of barrier. See how you got a single layer, a single barrier here? That single barrier, we don't want your lungs leaking either. So researchers found that leaky lung is a real potential issue when you have the wrong diet. And I like that little hamburger they drew in this. So again, that reminds me of one of those old, if you grew up when I did, those old Barbie dolls. My sister had one, and it had the little mini hamburger. You guys remember those? It looks like that little mini hamburger. Anyway, side note. So leaky lung, which would create the same kind of scenario here where we would get the chemical inflammatory mediators being produced as a result of feeding bacteria improperly and breaking a hole in that barrier. So we know that there is a dietary effect on asthma, and any doctor who tells you differently doesn't read literature and doesn't pay attention to diet and probably hasn't studied diet, and so probably is not real super qualified to even talk about whether or not diet plays a role. I always say, if you're going to be a doctor and you're going to be an expert and you're going to talk about how something can or can't affect it, you should be an expert in what you're talking about. In nutrition, there are very few nutritional experts in the world with the title doctor behind their name. So, but there are some really, really good ones. So anytime you're taking nutritional advice, my point is, when you're taking nutritional advice from a doctor, make sure that doctor you're taking that advice from has nutritional background training and not just the meager 7 or less hours that they get in medical school where they learn that nutrition is not really all that important. So again, moving on here, this is another diagram, and I want to talk a little bit about excessive airway mucus, because this is a big problem. So we make mucus. Okay, why do we make mucus? Mucus is protective. It's a coating. If you've ever eaten a food and you make a lot of mucus, what your body is doing, your immune system is naturally doing, is it's producing more mucus to lay down as a barrier to protect you from something in what you just ate. So it's a protective coating, but inside that protective coating, you also produce something called SIGA. Now that stands for secretory immunoglobulin A. It's an antibody, and it's your first line of defense. So it's your first line of protection along with that mucus. And so I wanted to talk about some things that we know can increase excessive airway mucus, because one of the things that happens with excessive mucus is, if we know what's triggering it, we can potentially remove the trigger, right? Because we don't want to drown in our own snot, so to speak, and we don't want to flood all that fluid into our lung base. So one of the things that creates excessive airway mucus is viral infection, bacterial infection. What's missing from this diagram that we talked about a moment ago, fungal infection can also do it. Oxidative stress, what does that mean? You ever heard of the term free radicals? One of the things we really haven't talked about much is smoking. We talked about air quality, but we really didn't talk about smoking. We all know this should be a no-brainer. Smoking increases the risk for the development of airway damage and inflammation and oxidative stress. And hopefully none of you watching this show, or at least smoking, know better than to do something that detrimental and damaging. But one of the reasons why smokers have such a hard time in their lungs and breathing is because they're creating oxidative stress through the production of free radicals caused by the chemicals and the garbage in cigarette smoke, right? So that leads to mucus, because why? Why are we making the mucus? Your body is smart. It's making the mucus to protect you from what you're doing, or to protect you from things that could be potentially very dangerous. And so this is why sometimes when a person gets a cold or a flu, and excuse me, and they get the sniffles and they get kind of the mucus, it's because their body is naturally trying to respond by laying down more protection. And so one of the things that some people do is they take medications to suppress mucus formation. And that, in my opinion, is a very bad idea. Anytime you take medicines to symptomatically suppress your symptoms when your body is trying to help you, you could actually create a problem instead. So again, these are big ways that excess airway mucus is stress, inflammatory reactions, viral, bacterial, fungal infections, the wrong foods. Let's talk about some of the foods that we know can also lead to excessive mucus production. Now, this is not an inclusive list, but these are some of the top foods that we know can exacerbate or increase mucus production. And at the top of the list is dairy. Okay, and probably I should have put grains as number 2 and eggs as number 3. But dairy is a big one. Dairy is a very, very big mucogenic producing food. Eggs can also cause you to produce mucus. Grains, bananas, potatoes, soy products, sugar, and alcoholic beverages. Now, one of the things you'll know, or you'll kind of, aside from the eggs, kind of everything else on this list, it is high in sugar. Okay? And sugar is one of those things, the more carbohydrate, the more sugar. If you overdo it, can create a lot of these mucus-based problems. So if you're struggling if you're struggling with your asthma issue and you can't figure out, and you produce a lot of mucus and you're still struggling, and you've changed your diet, but you're eating some of these, not the dairy, the grain, but some of these other foods, you might just consider looking at these and try removing them to see if you don't notice any improvements or any difference. But these are, these can be big mucogenic based foods. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.